So I was thinking a lot about the connective tissue between this film and your previous film. And then by chance I saw that you wrote a rather lengthy text about the Green New Deal
Oh yeah.
and abolitionism.
Yeah.
So I was thinking that in a way, this text is sort of like the child of both film texts. And I was wondering if you could delve into how the abolitionist approach in terms of the prison industrial complex and the Green New Deal, how are they coherent with one another?
Yeah, so I've learned a lot from the prison abolition movement, and there's an idea that prison abolition is simply the destruction or the dismantling of prisons, which it also is, right? It's a movement for the liberation of people in cages, and the assertion that putting people in cages is not a good form of justice. But it's also a movement that says that we need to transform society, that we have to ask questions about what kind of society decides that putting people in cages or requires putting people in cages as a way of solving its crises. You look inside today's prisons, and it's all poor people in Canada. It's vast majority are Indigenous people. And people with mental health issues, people with drug use issues, people who are poor. And so you see a lot about the state of society by looking inside of our prisons. And so I think that that's actually a really useful way of thinking about the problem of climate change as well, right? So climate change, I sort of, for me, a real politics of environmental justice committed to defeating and resolving the climate crisis requires that we think about real transformation in how power is allocated in society, how a society is organized, what kind of organization of society leads us to destroy the source of our own survival, the planet, right? And so then we have to think about how the search for profit organizes modes of exploitation, organizes the power of the fossil fuel industry, organizes the pollution of our atmosphere and our seas. And I think we can think about a future that's not just, carbon free, but reorganized so that people have good jobs and places to live, in which profit doesn't rule, what people's lives are like. And that, for me, is the lesson of both the prison abolitionist movement and real environmental justice movements.
How did you think about or develop the oral sense ability of the film?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I think that is underappreciated about cinema is that it's a sonic medium as much as a visual medium, right? We talk about images, but we should think about sounds and what sounds do to the body. I love watching cinema because it's almost a physical experience to sit in a room and sort of be invited into this aesthetic space where you are not just taking in information and ideas and drama, but you're inhabiting an atmosphere. And if you do your job properly as a filmmaker, I think you use the language of cinema to create atmosphere and to create a space in which one can enter into the language of mood and the language of complex emotions. And sound is really, really important for that, especially in terms of how sound, especially, and I really mean sound, not just music, can exist in a kind of tension with the images. So do more than just sort of scoring the emotional beats, which you see in a lot of film scores. So with this film, we were really playing with, on the one hand, a real sense of groundedness. This is a film that takes place in everyday life, like non-dramatic life, just the everyday of people getting about their business in a city, and suggest this is a climate change film. A climate change film takes place in people's kitchens, on the beach, in trucks, not just over there in the Arctic or in the
in spaces where there's actual proof of
right. So, but at the same time, I was interested in creating an atmosphere that would let people watching grapple with their feelings and also feel estranged from what they're seeing. You know, it's really hard to appraise everyday life. It's hard to look at ourselves in the present. It's too close, you know, and so it feels like it has to be this way. And so there's an interesting thing you can do with cinema, which is to sort of distance oneself from their own reality. And so we played a lot with the sound to create like moments where you could appreciate the strangeness of being these creatures on a planet, you know, to sort of remind us that we coexist with animals and that we exist in a galaxy. And so it has a kind of lo-fi science fiction quality to it that I think is meant to be pitched, to our kind of like visceral, physical state of being. And people have different experiences of it. I mean, some people actually like watch the film and say, I felt very calm. I was surprised to feel very calm. And then other people are like, my nerves are really rattled. And I think that that's part of what we did with the sonic design.
Did you have to develop a string of questions in order to get to the matter that you felt like examining?
You know, I don't think I had to develop a kind of sneaky strategy at all. I think that what I try and do is enact a kind of a sort of mode of interview that's like interviewee led. So it's an interesting process of sort of like deep listening and listening for subtext, constantly listening for what's just beyond the actual words of what someone has said, so that I can sort of start to imagine what they need me to ask them in order to say the things that are really on their minds. And I think that that's just an act of attempting real connection and attempting a sort of more holistic form of listening than just taking people literally at their word. And you know, I think that sometimes talking head films are derided in artistic documentary especially, but I think, you know, it's important to remember that talking is a human behavior also. So if we're interested in humans doing things, one of the things we do is we talk and we bullshit and we lie to ourselves and we lie to others and we try and find words to explain things that are inexplicable. And I'm really interested in the talking as a mode of surviving. And so what I try and do in my interviews is to give people the space to speak about their lives and their experiences and also convey some of what's actually underneath the words that they're expressing.
There's a time capsule quality to Claire's narration. And what I thought was such an interesting stance is, in order to have a better perception of now, we sort of have to consider, we have to look into the future to see how we might consider the present. And I thought that was a really neat device in terms of using her, I don't want to say robotic tone, but it's very, very specific.
It is, yeah. You know, it's funny working with an actress because an actress usually wants to know a lot about her character and wants to, you know, inhabit it. And I had to say to Claire, you know, I don't want you to be too tied to a character. I want your voice to convey the strangeness of being unidentifiable. You are just a presence that is knowing. That's what you need to embody. It's not a specific person. It's not me in 40 years, although it could be. But your voice is here to do the work that's really hard to do, which is exactly what you said, which is to appraise the present in the way that we might appraise the past. And I'm really interested in the way in which archival films, you know, get to be these documents from which we glean all sorts of wisdom. And so why do we have to wait? Why do we have to wait for, you know, 60 years to pass for us to be like, oh, look at all of this footage and now this is what it says about the state of society? Could we create a document in which we're invited, or in which the language of cinema is used in such a way to just dislodge us a tiny little bit from the unbearableness of now, so that we might do the work, the very necessary, urgent work of looking at the state of society. I mean, that's what I love about a Wiseman film too, is that it's, it refuses the idea that we're just individuals, right? It refuses the idea that all we have available is character development and character drama. He's interested in institutions, he's interested in neighborhoods, he's interested in how people move about in structures, and just try their best within a given place. And I wanted to try and do something similar to that in creating this portrait of a time and a place and a bunch of people that you meet inhabiting it.
I want to say or simplify that your frame is actually like a film, a film that looks at civilizations or societies could easily show not helicopter shots but shots from above, and to say like there's this big critical mass population and we're all ants in a system, but your frame technically is very street level, and sometimes I don't want to say poetic gestures, but sometimes you're looking above. And I was really curious as to that specific choice. Like I was saying, Seidel before, is that frame doesn't move, characters move in and out of the camera shot, but it's very specific, and I can't really analyze it further than that. But
I mean, part of it's just aesthetic, right? Like one of my influences is the street photographers, the sort of street photography movements of the 50s, 60s, and onward. Someone like Robert Frank, these sort of photographs of American life. And you look at these photographs and they seem so classic, so iconic, but actually at the moment that he was making those photographs, they were considered avant-garde. They weren't quite neat enough, they weren't quite straight enough, his angles would be just off. And I aesthetically am really sort of drawn to composition, the way in which we can use we don't need any other fancy tricks. We don't need, crazy dollies or drone shots. We just need a really organized and thoughtful eye to frame for us a scene of things happening. And, I really like, especially, shots that last long enough for them to move from being really concrete to abstract, to tiresome enough that your eye might wander within the frame, so that you can get more and more and more from it.
A sort of break with your previous film in a way. The shots are much long. You stay with your subjects a lot longer. I got that sense.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. In my last film, the scenes were really dependent on what was, what the scene was about, and also what the situation is.
Yeah.
And that's resources. Who are you there with? Am I shooting on my own, or am I with someone? But in this case, we really worked with a kind of language of long shots, but also wide shots, where the action isn't just in the middle, right? You have to think differently about what constitutes action. When you're looking at a shot, you think, oh, this is just telling me we're on the beach, and then an umbrella starts to roll away, and you think, oh, that's, it's sort of so ordinary, and yet hopefully within the feeling of the film, it's also a moment for you to be reminded at how wonderful, strange, weird people are. And that umbrella just rolling away in the wind is the action, and all we need from that shot is to just meditate on that for a moment.
In this film, I was noticing a lot the strange non-survival rituals of human beings, whether it's sport related or art or tech divertissements and whatnot. And then I was thinking about, there's all these institutions put into place to sort of like imprison the 99% in a way, to not disrupt things too many things. I don't know if you have any
yeah, I mean,
reflections on.
Well, one of the things I like to say about this film is that I think about, so it's not a film in which we're hearing from experts, right? It's really takes seriously its kind of mandate of talking to strangers about whatever they want to talk about, and suggesting to the audience that there's there are clues here that tell us something about the state of society and how we're all bearing it, right? And maybe about the paralysis that we seem to be in. And so one of the things I like to say is that people, there are people that say things in the film that I deeply disagree with. And I think it's important to be critical about those things, but also sympathetic, that we can be critical and sympathetic at the same time about people, because people are, myself included, we're having to make sense of the world using the vocabularies that are available to us, right? We're sort of limited in our vision of what's possible. We're told certain things about how the world has to be, and then we're told other things about who's to blame for our problems and what we should do about them. And I think that sort of how and when our capacity to think beyond those frameworks, like how is it that we accept reality as the only possible reality, that's deeply interesting to me. And that's in some ways the point of all my projects. My last film was about the US prison system, and it was in part, not just a film about, oh, it's terrible, oh, it's racist. It was like, how did we come to not be able to imagine a different way of dealing with harm? How is it that our imagination of what justice is got colonized by a mass incarceration as the only possible solution, especially when it's failing. And so I think we can say the same thing about the climate crisis, about capitalist crisis. How is it that we know it's bad for us? We feel the badness in all sorts of ways, whether it's our eviction or our losing our job or not being able to get a job or our student debt, and yet so many of us can't imagine any other way. And I feel like cinema and art can help do some of the work of helping us
make sense
of it and challenge some of the magical thinking that we're constantly participating in.
Thank you very much, Brett. Really appreciate it. Hey, this is Eric from myoncinema.com. If you want to support us, subscribe below. For more reviews, interviews, film festival coverage from Sundance, Cannes, Toronto, you want to check out these guys on this side.